You've probably heard the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Similarly, I think a good question is worth 1,000 answers, which is why I love today's reader question, because it's all about how we can use better questions to improve our emotional health and resilience. Hi, my name is Nick Wignall. I'm a clinical psychologist and the founder of The Friendly Mind, a free weekly newsletter where I share practical advice for emotional health and resilience. Today, I'm going to answer a question about questions and how good questions can actually improve our emotional health. And it comes from a newsletter reader who asks, in the past, I've used journaling as a creative practice, a la morning pages. The other day, I was thinking it might also be beneficial for mental and emotional well-being. What are some questions you'd recommend to journal about or contemplate as a way to improve my emotional health? Man, I just love this question. Such a good question. I have so much enjoyed thinking about this question and coming up with some questions, and I'm really excited to share them with you. I will say as a quick preface, I think the first three questions that I'm going to mention would be really good morning journaling questions. So if you're the kind of person who likes to journal first thing in the morning, the first three are really applicable there. The second two are more like evening questions because they involve reflecting on your day. Okay, so that's one. You don't have to split them up like this, but I think that could be interesting and a helpful way to look at them. All right, question number one is, what's one meaningful thing I'd like to accomplish today? So I hear from a lot of people who struggle with self-esteem issues or low self-confidence and things like that. And I think a lot of them are interested in the origins, understanding the origins of, where does my self-esteem problems come? Where do they come from? Where this low self-confidence, like what's the origin of this? Where does this come from in the past? And while I think that's understandable and potentially interesting or validating to understand those origins, what's much more helpful for self-esteem and confidence issues is to simply try to get in the habit of doing things on a regular basis that align with your values. In other words, being consistently productive with things that genuinely matter to you is one of the best ways to improve and maintain your self-esteem and confidence. The key here, though, is you don't need to be hyper-productive or superficially productive. This is not about generating tons of widgets. It's about being meaningfully productive and meaningful in your personal definition of that sense, doing things on a regular basis that are meaningful to you. So journal about this question each morning and then pick one thing and try to achieve it that day, right? And then you can pick a different thing the next day and so on. The other way you could do this, if you wanted, is after journaling about this for a while, you might realize, hey, there's one or two things that I think would be really productive for me to do every single day. And in that case, just commit to, in the words of Oliver Burkeman, who says, he's got this great phrase, daily-ish, which is, I think, really useful for those of us who get a little perfectionistic. Pick a daily-ish productivity goal that you'd like to hit and try to stick with that every day. Number two, what's an expectation I have, either for myself or someone else, that I would like to let go of? Expectations exert a huge influence over just about every aspect of our lives, but especially our emotional lives. Everything from negative self-talk and limiting beliefs to procrastination and relationship problems, so many of these stem ultimately from our expectations, especially unhelpful or unrealistic expectations that we haven't really examined or checked in on recently. For example, a lot of people struggle with a form of negative self-talk called worry. Right? So worry, a very common struggle a lot of us have, and all the anxiety that comes with it. What a lot of people don't realize is that their habit of worrying is actually maintained by an expectation that if they feel anxious, they have to do something to get rid of the anxiety. And this is important because a lot of people use worry, and this is they're not conscious of this most of the time, but they have fallen into the habit of using the mental behavior of worrying as a way to distract from or temporarily alleviate the emotion of anxiety. So they're going to their head to get out of the feeling. The problem with this, of course, is that in the very short term, sure, it distracts you from your anxiety because it feels like you're doing something productive, solving a problem, thinking about what might go wrong. But in the long term, worry actually just generates tons more anxiety. So you're really only making the problem worse. But what's critical to see here is that the habit of worry is based on this assumption or expectation that if I feel anxious, I need to do something about it. I need to get rid of it. But that's worth questioning. Do I actually have to do anything when I feel anxious? Do I have to get rid of anxiety? Will something horrible happen if I just allow myself and be willing to feel anxious? I'll leave that up to you. My strong inclination is that that is not an especially realistic expectation and that actually you can learn to improve your tolerance of anxiety or any difficult emotion. And then you won't need these kind of unhelpful mental patterns like worry nearly as much. But that's all to say, it's just a really good habit to get into, to consider what are my expectations and are there any that aren't serving me anymore? And there's a lot of ways you can think about this. You can think about it in terms of different areas of life. So expectations at work, expectations with my family, expectations with my friends. You can also think about it with specific people. I think this is really helpful. List the 3 or 4 most important people in your life. And then each day when you do journaling about this, think of, okay, my expectations with my spouse. What are my expectations with my spouse? I'm going to spend 5 minutes writing down some ideas there. And then considering which ones of these are not especially accurate or helpful. It's a really productive question to ask yourself on a regular basis, I think. Number 3, who is someone in my life who would appreciate hearing from me today? As a culture, we're becoming increasingly aware of the impact of how much our physical health, our somatic health, affects our emotional health. Everything from kind of the gut-brain axis, you hear about gut health and how important that is, or the importance of good sleep or diet or exercise for our emotional health. And this is great. I'm glad we're becoming more aware of this. But something we're still not very aware of is the role of our social or relational health on our emotional health. And boy, does it matter. I think as much as our physical health, actually. People just don't talk about it and think about it nearly as much. In fact, when I did therapy with folks, what I would often see is people would come in and they would think about, okay, I've got some emotional struggle. I'm feeling really anxious and my anxiety is impacting my relationships. And that's true. Our emotional struggles, our emotional life generally does impact our relationships for better or worse. What people don't realize is that it's a two-way street and that actually our relationships significantly impact our emotional health. So the quality of our relationships, to a large extent, will influence the quality of our emotional health. If you're really struggling in a relationship and things are really rocky and there's a lot of conflict, that's going to exacerbate or even just lead to anxiety, chronic anxiety, anger and resentment, maybe even, depression, regret, things like that. So it's important to be aware of one of the best ways actually to improve your emotional health is not to work on your emotional health directly, but instead to work on the health and quality of your relationships. And a very simple way, I think, to get started doing that is just to build this little habit of briefly, very simply, just reaching out to people who are important to you in your life, relationships that you want to tend to and cultivate. And because it's important to you and your emotional health that those stay strong and of a high quality. So just consider something as simple as taking a minute or two to, text an old friend or send an email to your daughter or write your spouse a little note and leave it on the counter before you leave for work. Super simple, but getting in the habit of thinking about your relationships, the ones that really matter to you, and what you can do on a regular basis to cultivate and deepen those relationships. One of the best things you can do for your emotional health in addition to the quality of your relationships. Number 4, what's something I did or did not do today that I regret? Regret is obviously a very uncomfortable emotion, but it's not bad. And in fact, the willingness to acknowledge and confront our regret is actually one of the most powerful ways to grow as a person and to improve our emotional health. So making a little bit of time every day, especially this is a nice one to do in the evening because you can look back on your day, this isn't about beating yourself up in kind of a critical or judgmental sort of way. It's simply about taking stock of and looking at, okay, what did not go well today? What were some mistakes I made? Where did I fail to live up to my own standards for myself or my aspirations for myself? So that I can look at that, again, in a non-judgmental and productive, constructive way, so that I can get a little bit better maybe tomorrow. So valuable and important. I think a lot of people resist looking at mistakes because they assume the only way to do that is in this kind of harsh, judgmental way. But you can actually, in a very compassionate, reflective way, you can use regret, the emotion of regret, as a way to think about and explore areas in your life where you could be a little bit better going forward. And those little bits of, the author James Clear talks about get 1% better every day. Tuning into your regrets can help you identify areas for those 1% improvements. And it turns out 1% improvements every single day compounds to an enormous amount of improvement and growth in our life. What's more, perhaps even more importantly, by deliberately tuning into and approaching your regret, you're teaching your brain something very important, which is that no matter how bad regret feels, it is not a bad thing. No emotion is bad, including regret. And once you start treating regret as an uncomfortable but ultimately constructive thing, you change your relationship to it. It becomes less combative and it becomes friendlier. And when your relationship with regret and sadness and similar emotions improves, you will be able to move on from them in a healthy way instead of getting stuck in them and mired in them. Number 5, what's something I did today that I'm proud of? Now, I happen to think that pride is actually one of the most psychologically vital emotions out there. It contributes to everything from self-compassion and confidence to motivation and self-esteem. But most of us tend to kind of avoid it or get uncomfortable with it because we have all sorts of cultural baggage about how it's bad to feel pride and you're going to come across as arrogant or full of yourself or I don't know, whatever. I don't know where that comes from. But it's silly to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because there are unhealthy extremes of pride, arrogance, for instance, that's no reason to disregard or avoid the emotion, generally speaking. And most of the time, it's very, very healthy, especially if you have a healthy relationship with your pride. It's going to impact the rest of your life, especially your emotional life, in really healthy and productive ways, I think. So I put this question in here because, I just want to remind people that it's perfectly normal and quite healthy, actually, to savor the emotion of pride, to spend a little time basking in and patting yourself on the shoulder for a job well done, whatever that might look like. Whether you nailed a presentation at work, whether you were an especially good listener with your spouse or your kid when they were upset, whatever that looks like, taking time to actually savor and appreciate your accomplishments by homing in on and embracing this emotion of pride, it's one of the best things you can do for your emotional health and well-being. As usual, if you enjoyed my answer to today's question, you can actually submit your own question, anonymously, of course, to have me answer when you become a member of my newsletter, The Friendly Mind, which you can join using the link in the description below. Cheers.